Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today, we're here to talk about Instagram versus reality and how it impacts Canadians and specifically first-time homebuyers and their buying decisions today. Andrew, let's get started with you. Does Instagram sell homes? And if so, what impact does it have on homebuyers?
I think Instagram helps sell homes. It sells the sizzle, but I think ultimately, at the end of the day, there's a lot more moving parts, and there's a lot more to it than just the sizzle, of course.
Right. But is it painting a good reality for these first-time homebuyers specifically?
No, I don't think so.
What do you mean?
I think Instagram and social media has a tendency to really make things look polished and shiny, and everything is great. But the reality of it is, we all know that it's not. But I think we get that dopamine effect when we are scrolling through Instagram. We get that effect, that fix, as we continue down that rabbit hole and that next reel. It just never ends.
Right.
So it's constantly feeding the beast. So I don't think it's a good thing.
So, Claudia, let me hear from you. You're an aspiring first-time homebuyer at some point. Do you agree with Andrew? Do you think that it's depicting a false reality?
I think so. I think there's a lot of misrepresentation on social media and Instagram specifically, because I feel like Instagram is kind of used to show pretty pictures and, oh, this house is aesthetic, and in my house I have all this furniture. I know I follow a lot of people or specific friends or just influencers who are a lot like that. And then some of them I've gone in person and it's nothing as it shows on social media.
Right. And that, I guess, can be discouraging, obviously, for someone like yourself to say, hey, like, how did that happen? How are they buying and I'm not buying, right?
Yeah, and I think the other part of it is that when I'm looking on social media, these people are buying homes my age or a little bit younger, and for reference, I'm 27. And I feel like I'm being left behind, and I'm seeing all these people be able to buy something and I can't, and I'm working so hard and it's just not happening for me. But I think what's left out is that people are in debt. They're buying their homes and they still have debt. They have school debt or any other type of debt, loans, or they're taking out a line of credit. So it is misrepresenting that these people are buying a home, but there's still money that they owe behind it.
Yeah, they're biting off perhaps more than they can chew. Michael, I'd love to hear from you. You've been in the industry for what, over 35 years now as a real estate agent? Yeah. So what's your take on this?
Well, I think of social media as having replaced print advertising. So, we used to spend a lot of money on print advertising. Now we spend a lot of money with social media people and I think there's always been false advertising. So you have, going way back, people distort or mislead people about locations in a print ad. Or when we started using photographs online, they use a wide angle lens. So when the people get there, it's a shoebox, but it looked like a ballroom. And that goes back to like the industry. That's an industry issue. And that's a very common, it's the ethics in the industry that or lack of ethics control in our industry. Brokers used to manage very small offices, like Royal LePage. When I started in Burlington, they had 5 offices in Burlington with 24 or 25 agents per office. So there was a manager watching people. Yes. Brokers today, they're landlords. They rent you space in their office. And people, unless there's a serious problem that the broker could get in trouble with, right, it's pretty well do whatever you like. And that's my view of it. And I think that the taking it up the next level, when somebody can get into trouble, advertising or any other sort of thing that people do that's like unethical or walks the fine line, the fines that RICO levies on people aren't big enough. So it's as an industry, how we control so that we're not misleading people. But not to be on a soapbox, but it starts at the top. And if you look, does anybody believe anything the government tells you? Does anybody believe? So there's a trust issue we have, and it's well founded. So I'm 65, and I'm from the conspiracy generation, the assassinations, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, Nixon resigned after saying, so we were the start of people that don't revere lawyers or doctors just because they're lawyers or doctors. And then, and the whole system permits, like when you have the prime minister like blatantly lying and cooking the books to avoid an inquiry into information he had. How can you believe anything? Like, who cares about a real estate whether it shows the living room bigger than it really is?
So we've established that social media does impact the home buying process. It does also complement it, but it can also affect perception of the home buying process for first-time home buyers. So who's to blame? Michael, I'd like to know from you, who's to blame?
Well, just what we were talking about before, it's if people are misleading people, it's a false advertising issue and it's a credibility issue. And if there's no checks and balances in our system, then it just keeps going. But I think that's what separates the whatever that saying is, because if you are credible, people want to deal with you. People know that you're honest, and the people say this all the time. Oh yeah, their listings are always overpriced, or that guy always has like stuff in his listings that isn't true, or I think they use a wide angle lens. So it'll all come out, whether it's print advertising or social media. I think that it's supposed to be a complement to your business, and if you manage it correctly, like you're doing with your videos, it will grow your business. So it impacts it, but it's just a complement to it.
So I gather what you're saying is there are realtors to blame in today. Is that what you're saying? Do you agree with that, Andrew?
Oh, for sure. I think any industry, as Michael mentioned, I think any industry's got got every layer of good, bad, and ugly, right? And I think it's exactly that. I think you're going to have really good people that do a really good job and have a great reputation and track record who utilize these tools to their benefit. I like to think that I do that. I'm sure Michael does that. But there are some that, they may take advantage of it a bit and leverage it in a way that is maybe
deceptive.
And people figure it out eventually.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's why 90% of the business is done by 5% of the people, or whatever that ratio is.
Absolutely, I agree.
So let me hear from you, Claudia, as an aspiring first-time home buyer. Who do you rely on for information on social media right now with regards to real estate?
Yeah. So I know on Instagram, like there's a couple people who I've gone to school with or whatever that come up on my platform, and I guess because I maybe know them, I have some trust that what they're putting out there is going to be accurate and more honest.
Right.
But on other platforms, if it's say TikTok, I think you have to really get a feel for what kind of videos that person's posting and really gauge that yourself, whether you think the information is honest or not. I think you can go to those people, but you also need to do your own research. And my primary is going to my dad to kind of check fact that information if it's correct.
So
is your dad a realtor?
He's not. He's an investor, but he's quite intelligent. So
right. So we've talked. Vince and I have talked about this before. Mm-hmm. You go to your dad, but if you have a really good realtor who has established that they're credible and honest, I personally, because I'm older, I find it remarkable the level of involvement of dads and mums and aunts and in-laws. When I bought my first house, I just went and bought a house.
Yeah.
And today you're selling to a panel of people, and a lot of times, and I'm sure not your dad in particular, but a lot of times, like the parents will come in and challenge us because we've got to like straighten out that realtor who's taking advantage of baby Jesus, and then they're giving their kid misinformation.
Right.
So that's really interesting. I think if you go look at like 5 houses with 5 different agents, hopefully one of them sort of is in sync with you and understands you and you feel trust in. But I think too often people in your generation in particular are relying on their extended family who love them and want the best for them, but because they love them and want the best for them, they can be getting the best deal in the world and they think they're paying too much money. Like, you know what I mean? So
And
go ahead.
like I do think our generation can be coddled. Like you said, you just went out and you got a house. Your parents didn't necessarily give you information or help you do that. And I do see that in our generation, and I think I do that with my dad too. But to some extent, I don't ask, my parents are divorced, so I have 4 parents, stepmom, stepdad, mom, dad. So I know which family member that I trust will have enough knowledge to help me with that. And I'm sure there's other people who are bringing on their whole family to help them understand what it is they're buying. But yeah, you have to be very selective. But I think there's just that in today's world, not being able to trust people. And even if there's a reputable real estate agent, there's still a lack of trust.
Yeah, to her point, I agree with you. I'm sure, Michael, you get that little gut feeling when you get that question from, I call it lot lawyers sometimes. You've got someone that's influencing the decision maker, and you get that in the gut of your stomach when you get that question. And it's not necessarily, they're not trying to be maybe rude to you on purpose, but you that feeling, and it happens a lot, more so than what people probably realize. And
So I wanted to share a stat with you guys, okay? A 2023 Sagen survey polled first-time home buyers and found that 67% of them felt like they wouldn't have enough of a down payment to purchase the first home they really wanted. So that's a startling stat. Claudia, let me ask you, is that how you feel? Do you actually feel like down payment's going to be a challenge for you?
I would say so. So I work full-time as an HR assistant. And then I also have a small business making kids furniture. And just between pooling both of those, my HR job is enough to pay for my bills for the month. And then my business is where I'm able to save money. But even then, unless I get enough, accounts for my business, it's very hard to save.
So, Michael, why would someone like Claudia have a hard time with that?
I don't know.
Or I mean, someone from her generation.
Yeah.
Sorry, not Claudia.
To save, I don't know. I don't. I'm sure you work very hard, but I don't know. People are buying houses, so I hear often from people like, "Oh, our kids will never be able to afford a house in Burlington." It's like, well, you should get them out of rep hockey and into, some tutoring.
come down our way. Come to Port Colborne or Wainfleet. We'll get you a house.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think part of the thing too is I don't know what your expectations are, but a lot of people want to start with a lot of things. When I bought my first house, I offered on about 4 streets on Seneca. It was off Lakeshore, but it was a little 40-foot lot sort of street, and I just couldn't afford it. And then this really dumpy house came up for sale, and I could afford it. And then I lived in it dumpy for a while, and then I was able to save some money and improve it. But I think that I think you have to look at what your expectations are and what's affordable to you, because I'm sure somewhere you could afford something, whether it's a co-op apartment to start or a very like the opening price point townhouse.
Sorry, to that point of can't afford a down payment, I think there's a lot of legitimacy to that in a certain extent.
Right.
But I also think that a lot of people do have the down payment. I think there's a lot of people that actually do have it. They just don't maybe realize it, that $20,000 can actually buy you something. The next step of that is not saying that you need 40 now because they saw the house on Instagram that's 550 that they want that. It's taking that 20 grand and what can I afford for 20,000? Is it that townhouse in that not so great area in, a smaller town just outside of the city that has higher price? Like there are homes you can buy for 350,000 in Niagara.
It sounds like there's some entitlement out there. Is there some entitlement, Michael?
For sure.
Hold on, I'll speak to this.
Okay. Tell us.
I do think that for the vast majority of people that there probably is an entitlement that, you know, you said your first house is a fix-me-upper, it was a shoebox. And I think now at our generation, we do want to move into a nicer house than, you know, something that is a dump. But for me personally, like, so I did student housing till I was done university, and in college, that was my 5th year, did student housing. I was saving money because it was only $400 or $500 to rent out a room. And then I moved into my apartment. So right now it's about 1,100 plus hydro. So it's quite a good price right now for an apartment. But still being able to pay those bills is hard. And yeah, I don't know. It's just trying to save, but
You don't seem convinced.
No, I'm sure it is. I don't want to talk about you because I don't know enough about you, but I think there is an entitlement. I think there's an expectation. People think they deserve, you know, I don't know where your parents started, but I look, you know, when I was a little boy, I grew up in Montreal, and my parents lived in a 2-bedroom flat, and they put the 3 of us in the like in the master bedroom, if you want to call it that, and they slept in the smaller bedroom because they had 3 kids and they had 2 bedrooms. So, and they saved, and then they bought a house, and you know, they ended up doing really well in many sort of aspects of their lives. But they started out with, you know, paying, I don't know, like $75 a month or 105. I don't even know what the rent. So you know, you rent, you buy like the dumpy house, like and I listen to people, I see people on the news talking about it, because the housing crisis is such a huge issue now that people, it's a political game too, right? It's about how to, the WEF is at work there, the World Economic Fund. It's all part of the scheme to take all the money away from anybody who's worked hard and is now being made to feel guilty about enjoying the benefits of their fruits of their labor.
Yeah.
But I think that, yeah, I think that people do have an unrealistic expectation. You know,
so I can't speak to everybody, but for me, so I make kids furniture. And the reason that started was because I wanted to buy a house. And then I was like, I fully acknowledged that I would need a house that I would have to renovate. It would be, you know, 300,000, 400,000 max. I probably could have put it down at $20,000 down payment. But then there was the problem of who would do my renovations. There was no way I could afford someone to do my renovations. So I asked my dad, and I learned how to use tools. And out of that grew my business.
sure. But the other thing too is,
So we've established that social media can distort reality for our first-time home buyers. Now let's talk solutions. Andrew, how do we get ahead of our first-time home buyer expectations?
How do we get ahead of it?
Yes.
It's a great question. I think just continually putting the message out there, you know, encouraging people to lean on credible resources to get information is very, very important. And if that's done through the channels of social media, I think, you know, I think that needs to be focused. There needs to be more focus on that from professionals like you and I. I think there needs to be a lot of focus on that stuff in order for people to.
Because really, social media can't pre-approve a buyer, let's say, for example, or paint a realistic reality. So, Michael, how many of these first-time home buyers do you find are properly prepared before they go out?
we usually hook them up, or they've come prepared. Most of the people, and a lot of times it's with the assistance of their parents, and a lot of times they're getting money from their parents. Yeah, so in terms of what they can afford, they usually have a budget. You probably find the same thing. We want to spend this much money, and then they look around and then they squeeze a little bit more, and then maybe the parents throw in a little bit more, and then they get a really nice first-time buyer house.
Interesting stat on that. Very recently, from a poll, 67% of first-time home buyers receive help from parents in their first transaction. That's startling, isn't it?
Amazing.
Yeah, and 1 in 4 borrowers actually receive help from parents every month for that monthly payment on the mortgage.
Wow, interesting.
That's a new stat.
I'd say that's a self-esteem stealer.
So is it?
Well, yeah, sure. If you're an adult and you're living in your house and your parents have to pay, give you an allowance to afford where you're living.
Yeah. Well, is that a good solution? Would you accept that as a solution for yourself?
I've talked about it with my parents, and my dad has, like, I'm a single person, so I think a lot of home buyers are usually, you know, two-person per household. So that does make it better. So me being still in that single phase of my life, having my dad's help might be possible, but does bring down the self-esteem because I am working hard, and I would love to be able to do that purchase by myself. But if my dad can help me and help me get ahead now versus when they're gone, then it would be like my inheritance, basically.
I think could be some good to that as well. I think, yes, self-esteem. I think there could be some good if the family's on the same page, and the child or the kid is going to pay back a certain amount of money as they get established. I think that's probably a little bit more on the rare side, but I do think it does exist, where there is an agreement in place, and the kid does have a bright future, and there are good things. It's just they need to get their foot in the door to build some, their real estate, build some equity, start to pay down. You know what I mean? So I think there could be.
I get the help them with the down payment, but then I've never heard of
No.
that they actually help them each month. It sounds like somebody's living beyond their means.
Yeah.
Which gets back to entitlement and expectations and what we.
And I think there's other ways, like, to have your parents not involved in a monthly payment is, okay, you buy a house, make the basement a rental property. Make a room rented out to a student. There's tons of students in this area that you can rent out to. And if you have to make that sacrifice, you have to make that sacrifice that you're going to be sharing a house for a year or two until you can pay off some of your mortgage, and then maybe you look for a better job in that meantime, or you start a side business or something. There's many means, I think, nowadays to come up with supplementary income.
Yeah, and you know what? Those are good solutions, but hard to find those on social media right now, right? Because most people aren't doing that, right?
Yeah, it's true.
The other thing, just to throw a little extra layer. So with the high rate of divorce, somebody's parents are funding a house, like they're giving the money up front and then they're paying so much a month, and then there's a problem in the relationship. Do the parents get stuck holding the bag?
I've seen it.
Yeah, we've seen that before as well, right? And again, that does kind of bleed into the entitlement side of things too, for sure. So Andrew, tell me, what's your hot take really on for a first-time home buyer now in terms of solution? What's the solution for them?
So if you really want to buy a house, figure out what your budget is, get pre-approved, and go to the market area that fits within your budget and find the best house that fits your needs and wants.
Okay, very good. Michael.
All of that, but I think the really important thing is to sift through agents until you find someone who's credible that you can trust, because we see people make mistakes or pay too much money and we feel badly for them. So I think having the right professional person is, with everything you're saying, that's a key ingredient too.
Right, thank you. Claudia, what about yourself?
I think the biggest thing that I see that lacks is people don't have any personal budgets happening, no Excel sheet, no spreadsheets. Once I started doing that, I was able to see where my money was going, how much I was spending, where my money it was pulling from to pay my bills, how much was in my TFSA, how much was in my bank account. And a lot of people lack that. I actually shared it with one of my friends who was buying a home with her husband and her daughter, and she actually thanked me because it allowed her to be able to see where her money was going. And I think a lot of people my age don't actually know. And there's many more areas where you can spend money on Amazon, or you just go to the store, right? So it's very good to know where your money is coming so that you could properly prepare for the future of buying a house.
Absolutely. Sounds all very good. Michael, thank you for joining us. Andrew, thank you. Claudia, thank you so much. So I think we've discovered today that social media does play a role in first-time home buyers' decision-making. But we've also come up with some really good solutions. At the end of the day, it's important for first-time home buyers to get properly educated, have a budget, and find people that they can trust to bring on their team. That's a real estate agent, that could be a mortgage broker, and so on and so forth, so that they can make educated decisions and be properly prepared ahead of their first purchase. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to our next episode.